in this book. I don't know, kind of maybe like a Harry Potter Horcrux or something. Except I suppose that would make me Lord Voldemort, so maybe that's not the best analogy. I do know, however, that the other essayists also feel strongly about their essays, that they have shared a piece of their lives that they normally wouldn't share. They are very honest essays, and I think wonderful things come from being honest. We started this project in April 2012, finished it in November, and then Colleen Whitley delivered the physical manuscript to signature in December while I was still living in the Marshall Islands. From the beginning of the project to the time of publication, just in the last 3 years, a lot of notable and interesting things have happened for women in the LDS Church. This is not a comprehensive list, but I wanted to provide some context for tonight and mention some of what we saw happening after we wrote our first drafts. So, starting in June 2012, the Feminist Mormon Housewives podcast began. The Young Mormon Feminist group was founded. Nyland McBain gave a talk at the Fair Mormon Conference acknowledging the psychological pain some Mormon women feel at church. And a few months later, the age of eligibility for young women serving missions dropped from 21 to 19. Then came the Facebook group All Enlisted and the first Wear Pants to Church Day and the Let Women Pray movements. Then Ordained Women was founded along with MormonFeminists.org. Claudia Bushman and Carolyn Klein published Mormon Women Have Their Say. And in April 2013, sister missionaries were invited to join mission leadership councils, and Jean A. Stevens became the first woman to pray during General Conference. Then Sherry Dew published Women in the Priesthood, and the church released 2 online essays, Race in the Priesthood and Plural Marriage and Families in Early Utah. Next, in January 2014, Lindsay Hansen Park started her Year of Polygamy podcast with the Feminist Mormon Housewives group. And in March, portraits of the church's top female leaders were displayed in the conference center for the first time. Sister Ofa Kaufusi was the first woman of color to pray in the women's meeting. The Mormon Women's Stand group was organized. Female leaders were included for the first time in the centerfold of the Ensign magazine, and Kate Kelly was excommunicated in June 2014. In August, Nyland McBain's book Women at Church was published, and Dora Mkabela from South Africa was appointed to the General Young Women's Board, along with women from Brazil, Japan, and Peru, and she was the first woman of color to pray at a session of General Conference because the church confirmed that the General Women's Meeting is now an official session of General Conference. In October 2014, the church released 2 more online essays called Plural Marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo and The Manifesto and the End of Plural Marriage. And in March 2015, the Feminist Mormon Women of Color blog began, and the Utah Senate passed legislation to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity with exemptions for religious organizations. This bill was backed by the church, and earlier this month, the church made a first-time donation to the Utah Pride Center youth program for LGBTQ youth. And now Signature has published Fresh Courage Take, New Directions by Mormon Women, but it doesn't stop there. This year alone, we will have 2 other books, Voices for Equality and Mormon Feminism Essential Writings. It's hard not to feel that this is a unique and exciting time for women in the church. What I see going on here is a wonderful and needed conversation, and our book is part of this larger discussion about gender expectations in religious communities. It is natural to feel threatened by people who disagree with us, just as it is natural to create boundaries and make enemies of those who are different from us or believe differently than we do. But this is where I believe our mentality as a culture can improve. Cross-border dialogue, understanding, and empathy are crucial for healthy communities. Whether these dialogues occur between leaders and members, men and women, single and married people, cisgender and genderqueer people, stay-at-home parents and working parents, black and brown and white people, Mormons and ex-Mormons, and any other kind of difference. But it is not just about the conversations we must have with others. Fresh Courage Take also shows that we must have hard conversations with ourselves and even with God. In the book, we present the lived experiences of 12 different women who wrestle with their identities, their expectations, their fears, and yes, even God. In my case, I was wrestling with a false God that I named Giselle, the person I thought I had to be in order to be good and to be loved. I built her unto myself, and it was my responsibility to take her down. In the book, you'll read about other wrestles, and I honor these women for their struggles and for their stories. We don't pretend to be representative of all Mormon women because that is impossible, but we do claim that we have had valuable experiences worth sharing, and we validate other women's voices as well. The intent of Fresh Courage Take is twofold. First, to show that traditional roles such as wife and mother, wonderful though they can be, cannot always be fulfilled as envisioned, and this should never leave a woman feeling like she is somehow inferior or broken. And second, to show that we can still have unity even with our differences. Since we represent a spectrum of belief and practice, the authors of this book do not see eye to eye with each other on many different issues. And our message is that that's okay. While my own beliefs have evolved, for example, I still value my Mormon heritage and my relationships. We don't have to agree on everything to love someone, or we'd never love anyone. And I still very much subscribe to the second great commandment, which is love your neighbor as you love yourself, which implies that you love both. The pomegranate here is a symbol across many cultures and religions throughout human history. Many Jewish scholars hold that the pomegranate was the original forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. In Mormon theology, Eve is considered a hero for taking this fruit of knowledge of good and evil, an act that ushered in the mortal world where we can learn and grow and experience joy. Eve did this even though she disobeyed both God and her husband in the process. One of our essayists, Carly Anderson, was my biblical Hebrew teacher at BYU, and she couldn't come tonight because she's just leaving Jerusalem today, but I'll make her proud anyway and say that the Jewish word for pomegranate is limon, and some linguists have concluded that at its root, the word means to rise up, exalt, uplift, and that is what we hope our book will do for you. We encourage you to leave reviews on Amazon and let your friends know about Fresh Courage Take if you think it would benefit them, if you see them hurting or in need of courage as they take new directions or make a fresh start. I am very pleased tonight that you'll also get to hear from Colleen, Karen, Rachel, Erica, and Camille. We're sorry that we can't all speak tonight, but if you can't get enough of us, we'll also be presenting at the Sunstone Symposium this Thursday at 2 o'clock. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Jamie asked me to write about the history of women in the church, largely because I have lived through so much more of it than any of them. And it's an interesting topic. When the LDS Church was organized in 1830, American women had very few rights. They couldn't vote, couldn't inherit property in their own names, have custody of children in case of divorce, and corporal punishment by husbands, read that spousal abuse, was not only common, it was upheld by law. A man could legally beat his wife with a stick no bigger than his thumb. Thumbs up, gentlemen. Let's see how big that is. When the Mormon Church was organized in 1830, it was organized under the auspices of 6 men. because that is what the state law of New York required. In fact, there were 60 people in attendance, fully half of them women. Women in early Mormon Utah had the same access to education and civil rights as men. In 1850, the University of Deseret, now the University of Utah, opened as a co-ed institution. Women in other parts of the country would battle for years beyond that for the right to attend school. Well into this century for the Ivy League schools. Women had always voted to sustain leaders in church. All those in favor? So, of course, they voted in the territorial elections as well. And women continued to vote, continued to own property in their own names, continued to do all of these things until the Laurel Anti-Polygamy Act in 1862 through the Edmonds Tucker Act in 1887. Congress, in attempting to free women from the bounds of this wicked church, banned them from voting, forced wives to testify in court against their husbands, took away the right of children from polygamous marriages to inherit their father's property, denied women the right to inherit property in their own names. The logic of politicians always fails me. Now, ironically, the right of women to own property was restored in the state of Utah in a case involving Susanna Bransford, whose husband, Albion Emery, had owned a piece of the Silver King mine. And to their great credit, his male partners brought the case and helped her win 20% of one of the richest silver mines in the history of the world. Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado all legalized voting within a space of 3 days. Then they voted in that order, Utah, Wyoming, and then Colorado. I hunted high and low for the quotation, and I couldn't find it, so I didn't use it in the chapter. But Susan B. Anthony said it was the sunrise in the West. Now, one of the things that then happened at the turn of the 20th century was a great influx in innovation. Automobiles, industrial growth, and indoor plumbing. Boy, I love that last one. They were wonderful, but at the same time, they altered life radically. To that point, husbands and wives had worked together on farms. The women milked the cows, they herded the sheep, they chased things, they ran gardens, much the same way the men did. The men took the children into the gardens and taught them how to weed. They worked together in units. But the Industrial Revolution changed that. From the beginning of the 20th century into the mid-20th century, there was an enormous shift in movement away from farms, and into cities. And that meant several things. First of all, in the city, one person, almost invariably the man, would have to leave home to go someplace else to work. And that meant that somebody, usually the woman, had to stay home to take care of the children. The technical or specialized jobs in industry often required specific training, the apprentice journeyman kind of thing. So men were usually given that opportunity rather than women, because women weren't going to be hired anyway. But perhaps the most significant factor in really keeping women out of the workplace was that all the businesses were owned by men. If women did work, they worked at enormously lower salaries, even if they were doing the same thing. When Eugene Meyer ran the Washington Post and then died, he didn't leave the property to his daughter, he left it to his son-in-law, Philip Graham. When Philip Graham died in 1963, Catherine took over the Washington Post and ran it magnificently through the Watergate trials, through everything, and actually proved a woman can run a business. Seems amazing that it would take that long to determine that. Many companies simply refused to hire women. They also refused to hire various members of racial and ethnic groups, all that sort of thing. but that's another topic, although they certainly do dovetail. During World War II, Rosie the Riveter made inroads that became dead ends at the end of the war. From that point on, women were still, basically, if they wanted to be something besides waitresses or cut hair, they were going to be secretaries or nurses or teachers. Now, just so you understand, the prejudice works both ways. Men who wanted to be nurses, secretaries, or elementary school teachers were regarded as pretty whiffy, too. When I finished my master's degree at BYU, I was hired to teach full-time. 3 of us were. Neil Lambert, Steve, I can't even remember Steve's last name. I'm remembering his daughter's married name. You know how that goes when you get very old. Steve Walker and I were all 3 hired. Then I was married during the summer, so I went to work as a married woman, and things shifted. I could not have a faculty parking place because I had a student husband. While the families of male faculty members could take classes free, we paid full tuition for Tom the entire time. And I would be fired at the end of the year. A few months into the year, Soren Cox in the English department pulled me into his office and said, I don't know that you're actually going to have to testify, but I think you ought to know that your name is going to be bandied about. The men in the English department had been watching this kind of thing for several years, and suddenly now they had 2 of us, 2 test cases that they could take to Ernest Wilkinson and various other folks. I was the test case for benefits. We won on that one. After that, women got the same benefits as men. Pat, who was used as a test case for retaining work after marrying, was allowed to stay 1 more year because she had some physical problems that would prevent her from having children. But that was it. It was still several more years. And lest you think BYU and Ernie Wilkinson were extraordinarily bigoted, this was the common practice throughout all jobs in the United States. Many women who married simply kept their family names. One of the things the Women's Liberation Organization originally touted was that they were maintaining their own identity. No, they weren't. They were hiding from the personnel department. As soon as they found out they were married, they would get fired. And if that didn't happen, goodness knows the minute they got pregnant, they were out of work. The civil rights movement of the early 1960s, led by Martin Luther King, sparked a great many other kinds of things. But unfortunately, some of those others didn't have the careful training that King had given his people who did sit-ins and endured almost everything. And as a result, there was real backlash against not only civil rights, but against the women's liberation movement, against a number of other things. They were painted as radical bunches that were just out to tear things down. Well, the rioters who were rioting for various things were, yes. I actually met one young man who was a little kid when some of the riots broke out in Baltimore in the late 60s, 68. And he was told, oh, they're giving away free candy in that store, go in and take it. And so the little kid went in and gathered up all the candy he could carry and took it out because he thought that's what the store was doing. It was just a few who were actually creating that kind of thing. By the late 60s, marriage was being seen as an outdated institution, and the women's liberation movement ended up with a lot of blame for that, whether they deserved it or not. Through all of these kinds of things, the church was also changing in a lot of ways. And I've always been impressed with the way it changes, because they will sometimes show very good sense about leveling things a bit. For example, when I was a Relief Society president, I told a young abused wife, whose husband had just walked off, leaving her with 2 kids and a bunch of debts, to read Germaine Greer before she remarried. My bishop backed me up on that. No, I'm going too long. Like all living things, we are changing and the church is changing. And it's fascinating to watch how it's happening, both for individuals and for institutions. I'm of the opinion that all of us can change for the better and are doing it all the time. Thank you.
I think that's the first time I've ever clipped one of these things onto myself. Hello. I think I get to claim, of all the authors of the book, to have known Jamie the longest. I've known her since I was 13 years old, and we were in a German class together in middle school. And we've stayed friends ever since. She followed my blog years ago and approached me to write my essay based on things that I had been writing in my blog. My father has always been an avid outdoorsman. He, from his early teens, has been searching and exploring the local mountains here, and often blazing his own trails, trying to find some spot that he had located from a telescope in his home. And he has shared his love of the mountains with me from my childhood, and he taught me many important lessons while on the mountains. There was one lesson that I needed to learn from hiking that he couldn't teach me, and it was that you can never stop hiking. I came to a spot in my life where I realized I'd stopped moving. I was stuck in a valley. I had decided to attempt to live my life only for my children and my husband. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe that motherhood and marriage requires a great degree of selflessness and sacrifice, but not self-destruction. I felt like I had completely lost who I was. It has been said that you cannot serve from an empty plate, and I felt empty. The solution that I found to my emptiness was to start climbing again, both figuratively and literally. I wrote a list of 101 goals, things I wanted to accomplish for me, to get to know myself again. It started with things that would bring me back to my old hobbies. Two, most importantly, were cooking and hiking. I tried new recipes, some good, some bad. I started hiking again. I climbed mountains. Most of my goals were simple, things that could be completed in a day with little effort. Life is made of individual days. You climb mountains one step at a time. It is each step, each new view, that makes the process memorable and worthwhile. I was able to discover new things about myself. I went golfing, and I hated it. I tried to take up running and discovered I was really bad at it. I started to learn Spanish, and I loved the way that it challenges my mind. I learned that I can be strong through attempting to work my way up to being able to do 10 pull-ups. It took me 2.5 years, with a pregnancy in the middle, being able to only pull myself halfway up, and then each day trying to do a little more, employing myself as many times as I could, and it took forever, but I got there, and when I did 10, it felt wonderful. I had done something hard, and I had done it for me. One of my favorite parts of hiking is pausing to look back on how far I've come. It's amazing to watch the valley shrink behind you and the peaks grow above you. As I look back on my life, I want to see a life well lived, with valleys and peaks behind me, a sign of the experiences that I've had. The most amazing discovery that I have made through this experience is the joy that I have found in sharing my passions with my children. Once I rediscovered hiking for myself, I started taking my kids, and they are now my little hiking buddies. We live near a gully full of hiking trails, and my 3-year-old son has now started referring to all hiking as going to the gully, and he frequently requests it. I suspect that when they see me come alive on the trail, they absorb some of that energy. They feel my joy and they want to be a part of it. What better example can I be to my children than living a happy, complete life and making them a part of it? I am now their mountain guide, and I can't very well guide them if I'm not hiking myself. I look forward to sharing the same life lessons with them as my father shared with me on the mountains. I will tell them, never stop moving, kids. Keep going, step by step. You never know what you will accomplish, Yes, the valleys will come. Life is a series of ups and downs. You will get so low, you will wonder if you'll ever see the top again. But keep going, don't stop. The peaks will come, and they will fill you with awe. Keep hiking. Does that work? Higher, lower? Can you hear me breathing?
Can you tell us your name?
I am Rachel Brown. I'm the author of the essay Wounded. My involvement in this project is due to my association with Jamie. And a couple people were asking as we were having dinner how I know Jamie, and I told them that in preparation for speaking tonight, I wrote a brief social history of my relationship with Jamie and all of our interactions, which I won't share with you. But I did want to share that Jamie and I were briefly, I say briefly because I only went to 2 meetings, in the BYU Jiu-Jitsu Club. So once when I was wrestling Jamie, she let me know that my giggling was causing me to lose energy and power. And I think I went to 1 meeting after that, and then Jamie went on to compete in tournaments and win. So that tells you everything you need to know about the difference between our personalities.
Forgot about that.
So when Jamie asked me to participate in this project and contribute an essay, I felt like she had called to something in me that had been longing to speak at a time in my life when I was ready to begin speaking and sharing my story. Reading the entire completed book this week was an incredibly uplifting experience. I felt humbled by the narratives that these women have shared, and I want the other authors to know that I honor their journeys, and reading these accounts that speak of women becoming confident in their chosen paths was powerful and healing for me. I say that I felt healed because the recognition that although there are dissimilarities in our experiences and perceptions, each of these women has designed a life she loves, and that was a message that I really needed to hear. I'd like to share with you a little about the context of my own contribution so that when you read the book, you would know a little bit about where I was coming from. I want to focus my comments on the scripture in the book of Moses, which reads, "And the Lord called his people Zion, because they were of one heart and one mind." Growing up in the LDS church, I desperately wanted to be a part of that Zion. I love the gospel and the sense of purpose and strength I felt during study and worship. I loved the missionary stories about softened hearts and bended knees. I loved feeling that I was part of an ancient family on a hero's journey home to my Father. I remember being about 5 years old and sitting with my grandfather in church, standing to sing Called to Serve. I stood on the bench next to him and held his hand and sang out, "Called to know the richness of his blessing, sons and daughters, children of a king." I felt joy. I belonged there. Feeling I was of one heart with my fellow saints was always easy for me. Feeling that I was part of the one mind of Zion was much more challenging. I often felt I was out of step because I didn't and couldn't see things the same way others seemed to. My mind felt particularly out of sync when it came to issues of gender in the church, which I explore in detail in my essay for Fresh Courage Take. To reconcile my own divergence with the one mind of Zion as I viewed it, I assumed I needed to make my mind like everyone else's, like the leaders of the church, like God. The strategy I used throughout my formative years and beyond is what is referred to in psychology as splitting, also called black and white thinking, or all or nothing thinking. Splitting is the failure in a person's thinking to bring together both positive and negative qualities into a cohesive, realistic whole. It is a lens through which stimuli is interpreted as all good or all bad, with no middle ground or gray areas. Black and white thinking serves an evolutionary function of helping us discern quickly between safety and danger. As evolving ancient humans, we had to decide if something was dangerous to us or not so we could escape or defend ourselves. There's not much room for nuance in fight or flight. When church rhetoric appeared to support dichotomous thinking, I couldn't fight the church or flee from it, so I both fought and fled from myself. I experienced a shift in cognition in recent years which led to a shift in my faith and how I understood the gospel. I began to explore the gray areas I'd always tried to pretend didn't exist. The journey from a straight and narrow mind to a more expansive mind has been enthralling, bittersweet, and has changed my life completely. One of the realizations I came to during my transition is that I had been mistaken in my understanding of Zion being of one mind. If there is or is to be a Zion community, it will be comprised of many minds. My grandfather shared this anonymous quote with me years ago. As diamond dust makes other diamonds shine, so minds are polished bright by other minds. The Zion-like one mind, as I saw it, causes us to see differences as weaknesses instead of strengths. I believe there's benefit even in the friction and tension that can sometimes occur as we challenge each other. There's growth and insight in that process. The influence of many minds shakes us out of our singular realities and our black and white thinking and reminds us that no situation is dichotomous and no human being is one-dimensional. As I live my truth as it unfolds, as my insights and perspectives evolve, I am rubbing against other minds who are also creating Zion. I now see humanity and connection with spirituality as an opportunity for my mind to be polished by many other minds. We make each other brighter. We are creating sound instead of just creating echo chambers. I've also begun to understand that even within the church and those actively participating, the one mind of Zion I had imagined does not exist. It's not accurate to the complexity of human experience. American novelist Marilyn Robinson states, "Every single one of us is a little civilization built on the ruins of any number of preceding civilizations, but with our own variant notions of what is beautiful and what is acceptable. We take fortuitous resemblances among us to be actual likeness, because those around us have also fallen heir to the same customs, trade in the same coin, acknowledge more or less the same notions of decency and sanity. But all that really just allows us to coexist with the untraversable and utterly vast spaces between us. Rather than creating a sense of loneliness, these thoughts fill me with awe that we humans are able to connect and share as much as we do. But I also feel a deep respect for those vast spaces between us and the private and intimate space that is the mind of every human being. Being of one mind in the sense that I thought I understood is an impossibility." I'm reminded of the children's story Horton Hears a Who, where an entire planet of people, the Whos, exist on a speck of dust. I imagine that in a fundamental sense we are all existing on our own dust speck. I used to believe growing up that in our faith tradition we are telling the only true story. But on each of those tiny specks of dust, each Who is telling their own story, which is a true story. In Horton Hears a Who, the inhabitants of the tiny world are in danger and must convince others that they really do exist. Their elephant protector, Horton, tells them, "You've got to prove now that you really are there. So call a big meeting, get everyone out, make every Who holler, make every Who shout." So almost everyone in Whoville begins to shout, "We are here, we are here, we are here." And still no one but Horton can hear them. So the mayor searches Whoville until he finds a very small shirker named Jojo, who is playing with a yo-yo instead of helping to make noise. The mayor carries him to the top of the highest tower, where Jojo lets out a yell, "Yop." He says "yop," which is not a real word, it's a Dr. Seuss word. At which point the book reads, "And that yop, that one small extra yop put it over. Finally at last from that speck on that clover, their voices were heard. They rang out clear and clean, and the elephant smiled. Do you see what I mean?" For me, my contribution to Fresh Courage Take was like my yop, bursting through the atmosphere on that dust speck. It represents ownership and celebration of my mind. There is a powerful symbolism in this being the work that's been included in the book, because this essay is the first time I ever voiced these thoughts, the first time I ever laid claim on this part of my story. It may be a small voice, but it is my voice and I am proud of it. In a lot of ways, Zion cannot exist until the yop is heard and we recognize the other, honor our differences, and listen to the many minds who all have a valuable perspective to share. Fresh Courage Take absolutely accomplishes this. Thank you for listening to me, and I believe that I'm here on my dust speck, and I hope we can see other people on theirs and listen to them when they are shouting, "We are here, we are here, we are here."
I'm Erica Ball. My essay is entitled Love Your Intellect. Jamie approached me 3 years ago and said, would you like to write something? And I thought to myself, I'm math, I don't words. But I thought this is a good thing for me to do. I think this is something that I should do. So I committed to it before I really thought about what I was going to write about. And then I asked Jamie, what should I write about? And she said, well, why don't you write about being an intelligent Mormon woman? And again, I said yes before I really thought about even what that meant. And then I thought, I'm going to have to claim to be an intelligent Mormon woman? Like, what were you thinking? But that really led to the thoughts that came after it, which were, why does she think I'm intelligent, or am I? Is that a label I want to claim? Who's to say who's intelligent and who's not intelligent? And several themes started to emerge from my thoughts. One was that society has a very narrow view of intelligence. I'm a statistician, I do math. People say, oh wow, you're smart. And I'm like, well, you write, and you nurture your children, and you're amazingly artistic. Can't we celebrate all of these types of intelligence? So I talk a little bit about broadening the concept of intelligence. Another theme that arose as I was thinking about this was being a woman in the math and sciences, and I wanted to share my experience about that. I don't feel particularly a pioneer in that arena, but I did have some experience there. And then another one, being a person of faith and a person of intelligence. These are things that I don't think are at odds with each other, but I needed to explore that theme for myself. Can I be a person of faith and a person of reason? And lastly, the theme that I talk about is the one that I think is most damaging to us in our society. We have these, a split of only math people are smart, or only men can do math and science, or but the one that I think is most damaging to us is the thought that a lot of us harbor in our hearts of, some people were born smart and I just wasn't. And I really wanted to address all four of these themes, and so I wrote a little bit about each of them. I just wanted to share a little bit. One of the things that I learned as I was researching this was the etymology of the word intelligence. Intelligence comes from the Latin root inter, meaning between, and legere, to read or to choose. In other words, the literal meaning might be to choose between. This is interesting when applied to the scriptural passage in which Abraham describes his view in the premortal world and called the nascent spirits intelligences. Those souls were endowed with the power to choose between alternate plans and alternate leadership models. We similarly choose here on earth as intelligent beings in the most fundamental sense of the word. So I just wanted to kind of encourage you. I guess I think mine was the most preachy of the essays. I thought that as I was reading through, and thanks to the editor for toning down some of that for me. But I just wanted to encourage you that if any of these are things that you struggle with, that we have the ability to choose as intelligent beings to shed these limitations and these stereotypes and these things that are restricting us from becoming and reaching our full potential. And that was what I wanted to share with you tonight. Thanks.
I too have never used one of these. I feel very fancy. Is that okay? Can you hear me? My name is Camille Fairbanks, and I wrote the essay Divine Nature in this book. So my involvement with this book actually went back not to writing it, but as a proofreader. When Jamie had compiled all 12 essays, she emailed me and asked me if I would proofread for her. And I said, sure, I'd love to. I was just finishing up an English degree, bachelor's degree, and so I felt like, sure, I'm qualified to do that, whatever. And And as I read, I forgot to proofread because I was just reading and crying and loving it. And so when I emailed, when I did finally go back and proofread, as she had asked me to do, I emailed her afterwards and I said, I loved these essays, but I am sad that I didn't get to write one. And of course the manuscript was finished and I understood. So that was that. Well, some months later, one of the contributors chose to rescind her essay, and Jamie emailed me and said, would you still like the opportunity to be a part of this? And I said, yes, absolutely, please, yes. And I too, like Erica, then thought, oh, but what am I going to write? I just knew that I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to say. So, as it happened, by that time, the spring of 2013, I had become pregnant for the first time, and I was terrified. See, growing up in a devout Mormon family, it was generally accepted that at some point in my life I would get married and begin to reproduce. However, during those pivotal teenage years that we all know and love, my life developed in such a way that led me to dread the idea not only of pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood, but also of marriage and sex as well. So there I was, preparing to have a baby despite all earlier misgivings. As I faced the thing I'd molded my identity around swearing I would never do, the topic of my essay became very clear to me. I needed to write about how I'd come to create this child, who for so many years swore it would never happen. I needed to write about what had changed to make it happen, and what was still holding me back from fully embracing it and loving my life. And I needed to write about it, not just so I could contribute to this book, but so I could sort through my issues and move forward. I felt that if I continued burying my head in the sand, I would deliver my baby and completely check out from reality. I was pretty sure I was going to end up with a divorce and a social worker and possibly jail time if, and I know that sounds dramatic and you laugh, but I just didn't know how I could possibly love that baby. And the knowledge that I would have to pretend to love him, mainly so people wouldn't think that I was a bad mother, would drive me mad before long. So I wrote. I wrote my heart into that essay. I wrote my deepest fears that I hadn't admitted to anyone. I wrote about decade-old memories that I'd buried long before. I wrote of my life the way it had been, and the way I pictured it could be someday, if only I could let go of my deep-seated anxieties and embrace a new mindset. That new mindset included the following: to stop judging myself and release myself from guilt, to stop judging other women and release them from shaming, to stop thinking that everyone else is judging me, which itself is a lot easier to do when I'm not judging them, and to do only the things I want or feel impressed to do, not because anyone else says that I should do them, but simply because I want or feel impressed to do them. I don't want to give the essay away. I think we're supposed to try to get you to buy the books. But I will say this. I'm pretty sure that it worked. By writing it out, and by choosing to believe the words I'd written, I was eventually able to overcome most of my doubts and anxieties. And the ones I couldn't overcome, I learned to live with in a healthier way. Now, over 2 years later, I can say the words that my teenage self never believed that she would. I am a mother. I am a mother, and I love being a mother. I won't deny that it is difficult, and that many days the difficulties outweigh the joys. But for me, being a mother is more good than bad. So good, in fact, that I'm doing it again at least once, and I'm looking forward to meeting my second baby in November. Due date is December, but we're hoping for November. But even more important than my life-changing appreciation for motherhood, though, is this: that if I hadn't taken to it quite so well, or if I had chosen never to undertake it in the first place, I would still have merit in the world, and especially in the eyes of my heavenly parents. That knowledge, that freedom, has made all the difference. Thank you.
All right, let's...
Sorry. We just had some presentations that we'd like to make to Jamie.
Present you with these two.
It's perfect. Thank you guys.
We also all contributed some words and thoughts about Jamie and
Oh
put it
my
into
goodness, you guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, I didn't cut this nicely, but this is the book cover.
Oh my goodness.
Tree and Nicholas.
Guys, I have the best friends. I'm sorry. Thank you guys. Oh, you're wonderful. Yeah, I think you guys should get the books. Thanks again to Benchmark and to Signature and to my beloved friends. Thank you so much. And thanks you guys for coming through.
Are you still able to take questions? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
if anyone has questions, we'll go ahead and let you either address individuals or as a whole, and you can kind of pass the microphone around and share your thoughts. So, I have a few minutes of questions and answers here. If anybody has any? Jamie, I'll just let you go ahead and
Okay.
field.
Oops. Oh. Thank you. Yes.
What
Mother.
what precipitated the book that made you bring people together to write a book?
That's a fabulous question. So in April of 2011, I was in the Marshall Islands. My husband is a Foreign Service officer, and that was our first post. And in 2011, there was a bill that was finally passed that prohibited men from beating their wives. And it only came after Emson McCroro, who was a 51-year-old woman, was brutally murdered by her husband. And I know that sounds really grim. But I began, when you grow up in Utah, there's just a very strong sense of safety and that we're all okay, we're doing well. But and women are great. But when I was down the street from where this happened, it changed the game for me. And I felt like there was so much more that we could do for women. And I also started thinking, well, it's not been easy for me, so I mean, there's also that extra layer of pain that we don't share with each other. And I feel that it is very important to share with each other. So, thank you. Next question. For any of these lovely, lovely people. All right. Yes.
Ask it. What would you suggest to the audience, to reading audience, to how to improve situations or share and help other people in their journey?
Do you guys want to take this question?
Repeat the question, Jamie.
So why don't you repeat? Do you want to repeat it here?
You can go ahead and
Okay.
say however.
So what would you suggest for improvement?
Yeah.
Right? How would we improve the world? What do you guys think? Yeah. Come on up here.
Well, I just know, and maybe this is a bit self-promotional, but I just know that as I was reading the final galleys, it was before I had a hard copy of the book, I just thought, as I was reading essay after essay, I thought, oh, so-and-so would love this, and oh, I know somebody who really needs to read this. So step one would be read the book. And step two, I think, would just be share it and consider the ways that you might have been not necessarily closed-minded in your thinking, but you might not have thought of other perspectives, perhaps. And just by thinking of other perspectives, that right there is a wonderful first step towards helping others. The end.
You find other people's yops and listen. Okay? All right, yes.
I'm full of my well-deserved biases because 2 weeks from now I will turn 90 years of age, and I sometimes recall the work of or the words of a person whom I can't recall. His name was that God make my memory green, which is you'll appreciate when you reach 90 years of age. I don't know how to tell you to improve the world. I've been around 90 years and I haven't improved it much. But I can tell you how to improve your book now that you've written it and closed it and you're signing it. And I can tell you that because Rachel Brown is my Rachel Brown Strange. She is married. Is my granddaughter, and I am full of my prejudice about her. But when she was a little girl, and I used to take her to church when she was 5 years of age, and that continued for many years. And Rachel used to bring me poems that she wrote as a little girl, and she continued to write poems, and she wrote some great poetry for a child. And I continue to importune her now to continue to write poetry. And she said she has lost the ability, but now and then she breaks forth and produces a new poem. And if you want to make a better book, write another book with essays as good as these written by intelligent intelligences, and add some of Rachel Brown's Strange's poetry.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks. And there are very many stories out there, so it's behooves us all to listen. Thank you. Any final question? Yes, in the pink.
I have a question just about the publishing process. Were you solicited to write this book, or what's the association with Signature books on this particular project? And do you think it could have been brought forth by another local press or another interested publication group?
I feel like Signature was perfect for this book. I really do, and they have honestly worked with us back and forth, and they have been immensely patient. We've needed to wait our time in the queue of publishing, and publishing is slow. That's just how it is. But they have been my friends, and I have really, really appreciated that as I was going through changes myself. And they also have worked with us individually on our essays, and so I feel like they know our work, and it was the right time and the right place for this book to come forth. Thank you. All right, and thanks once again for coming. I really appreciate it. Oh, one more question? Yes, please.
I just wanted to know, how did you select the women who contributed to the book?
That is a really good question, and it was so organic that I don't even know if I could describe it, because they each have meant a great deal to me in my life, and I have known about their lives, but I have learned more about them through this process and admire them even more. They were just all part of my life at one point or another, and just, goodness, it did happen. It was meant to be. All right, thank you once again. Appreciate it.